Hey everybody, Grumbles here with another Starcitizen video. Well, I figured since I want to do more Starcitizen videos in the future with new stuff like the social module, Star Marine and Arena Commander 2.0 coming up, but not yet out, a good way to do that would be to show off the spacecraft we currently have available in the game off a bit. Specifically, I want to take a look at a few fitting options for those ships, to also show some of the different weapons and explain them a bit, and also explain some things like weapon hardpoints while I'm at it. I hope I can make a video for every craft that is currently flyable in the coming weeks and months, though for the multi-crew ships like the Cutlass I might wait for the full multi-crew release, and also show off all the different weapons we currently have in the game. Now, what I have to say right at the beginning though is I don't necessarily plan on doing a video on what's currently the strongest setup for every fighter. Simply because the game is still in early alpha and weapon balancing was so far not very high on the priority list, which means the power of different weapons will most likely change soon and often, so there is little point in showing what's currently the best, as it will probably not stay that way for long. And because the weapon balancing is not that great yet, most of what is currently considered the best setups rely on weapons that are stronger than they should be, which I personally have very little interest in. So I just want to show off a few options you currently have and how they can influence the ship's performance in different situations, and theorycraft a bit on how those setups might be useful later on in the finished game. And some of the setups might just be gimmicks that I want to try, even though it is clear that they are at least currently not very viable. Well, the ship I want to take a look at and try two different setups on in this video is the Hornet. It was the first Starcitizen fighter, so might as well start with it. In this video I fly the F7C single-seater variant. I will show the double-seater F7C M in a later video, most likely when multi-crew is released. So the Anvil Aerospace Hornet is, with the exception of the Vandal Glaive, the currently largest and heaviest fighter in the game and primarily a heavy hitter, and therefore, as one would expect, is also the most heavily armed and well protected fighter. It can carry up to 6 guns in gimbal configuration and up to 5 heavier weapons in fixed configuration as I use it. That focus on firepower comes at the price in speed and maneuverability though. Compared to other fighters like the Gladius, the Hornet is slower and doesn't turn as well, making it harder to close distance or keep distance depending on what you want, and can lead to fire weapons that have a slower muzzle velocity. On the Starcitizen website the Hornet is called a support ship, which in this case means fire support, and this is in my opinion a good description. The fighter can provide a good amount of firepower, but on its own will have trouble dealing with good pilots in faster, more maneuverable ships like the Gladius. Though that depends of course on the setup. In this video I use for example setups that are not necessarily very good in fighter versus fighter combat, mostly larger fixed weapons with a slower rate of fire. Now, for mounting those weapons, the Hornet has 2 size 3 weapon mounts under the wings and 1 under the nose, size 3 being pretty much the biggest size you will find on a single-seat fighter, and a ball turret on the back for 2 size 2 weapons. Now, the way this works is, on a size 3 gun mount, you can fit, big surprise, a size 3 weapon in a fixed forward firing configuration. You can however also fit a weapon gimbal in this slot, which will allow the weapon fitted there to move a bit. But you then can only fit a smaller weapon. The gimbal reduces the maximum size of the weapon that can be fitted by 1. So on a size 3 gimbal, like we could fit here on the Hornet, we can fit a size 2 gimbaled weapon. Now, the mount on the nose of this ship is also size 3, but on top of either a weapon or a weapon gimbal, this one is also compatible with the Hornet's chin gun turret, which has a greater range of motion than a normal gimbal and can carry 2 guns, but they are then only size 1. So the nose mount is more versatile than the wing mounts. It can either mount a fixed size 3 weapon, a gimbal size 2, or a turret with twin size 1 weapons. Well, and on the back of the Hornet we got the Hornet Spar turret, which can carry 2 size 2 weapons. The turret has an almost 360-degree field of fire, so it can fire behind the ship. Being a joystick pilot I have it locked most of the time though. In an emergency I can uncage it though and use it with either my tracker R or the mouse. So far the ball turret is the only weapon mount for the back slot of the Hornet I'm aware of, though there are also other modules you can fit there like a cargo pod or a long-range radar. But maybe in the future we will see a purely fixed weapon mount for there as well, maybe with 2 size 3 cannons instead of size 2 or 3 fixed size 2. As for missiles, the ship has 2 internal quad launchers, but they can only fire small size 1 missiles, which is smaller than what most of the other fighters can carry. Well, let's take a look at the first setup. this is more a gimmick. It's my Arty Party setup, which I have fitted more for fun than anything else. A Hornet fitted with an all-artillery cannon setup. Now let's see what I fitted on those weapon stations. Well, on the large size 3s under the wing and forward under the nose, I have 60mm Tarantula 870 Mark III cannons. Now, those cannons back a bunch when they hit, and being kinetic cannons can at least partially punch through shields, meaning can damage the actual ship before the ship's shields are down. A hit from all three of those will be felt. On the downside, however, the guns, as you may imagine, have a very slow rate of fire and a very slow muzzle velocity as well. That means they are not actually that great in fighter versus fighter combat, especially against faster fighters. They would be better against larger ships, but we will see how they do when Arena Commander 2.0 comes out. Now, on the two turret-sized mounts I got the smaller 870 Mark II 35mm cannons. They are pretty much the same weapons but with a smaller caliber. They of course do less damage but have a faster rate of fire, though it's still not particularly impressive. They do have, however, a much faster muzzle velocity than the 60mm cannons. Now, on the plus side, that faster muzzle velocity makes them better suited versus fighters. As a matter of fact, the whole setup would be much better if I would use only the smaller weapons on all hard points, instead of the three larger cannons I have on the wings and on the nose, since we fight only fighters in Arena Commander at the moment. Though they are still not great in this role because of the slow rate of fire. But again, this is not meant to be the best setup, and in this case I just wanted to put the biggest cannons I could find on the ship to see what happens. Now, another problem here is that the muzzle velocity of the small and the large cannons is so different that it will be pretty much impossible to hit a fast maneuvering target with both of them. Now, even fixed weapons have a limited ability to elevate and reverse the guns a little bit to converge the fire off them at the aim point. But if the difference in muzzle velocity is too big, as it is here, that won't happen. So that is something that you have to take into account when creating your setup. If you want to use all your weapons at the same time, their muzzle velocity should match as closely as possible. Now, that does not mean that there are no reasons to have weapons with mismatched muzzle velocities, especially later on. For example, with a setup like this, when there are larger spaceships in-game, you could have three large cannons like this to use versus larger ships and two with fast muzzle velocity as anti-fighter weapons. That way you could, depending on the situation, focus all your energy on either firing heavy weapons or small ones and get the best out of those weapons. But at the moment, with only fighters as opponents, that is not particularly effective. Well, we will see how it works, and later with larger ships in the mix. Now let's take a quick look at this setup in combat. As you can see, it is somewhat difficult to get enough fleet to fire the big guns on maneuvering targets, even slower ones like other Hornets, as the muzzle velocity is just too slow. So in a lot of situations I end up using the faster muzzle velocity size 2 guns instead, but of course they are smaller and there's only 2 of them. So while my ship has a lot of damage potential in theory, very little of it is actually reaching the target. That is also the case because of the somewhat slow rate of fire, which makes it difficult to fire just in the right moment when your pipper is on target, compared to the more rapid fire guns where you can just keep fire up in a big stream and get a hit every time your pipper crosses the target. The guns do a good amount of damage though when you manage to get some consistent hits with them on target. That is easier to do on close range though, as the slow muzzle velocity does not matter so much in that case. But as I've mentioned earlier, the Hornet is not the fastest fighter, so closing in on a target that doesn't want you close can be a bit difficult. Another option is of course to sneak up on opponents that are busy with somebody else, though not the most gentlemanly of tactics. But that is why I think this works better in a squad fight rather than a battle royale, since in a squad fight you can let a squad mate in a more mobile ship get the attention of an opponent and then move in to support with your larger cannons. After all, the ship is called support on the website. Now, maybe I could make the setup work a bit better with some more practice. I only started playing again after all, and some more tweaks on the joystick profile. Another element that will influence weapons' effectiveness in the future is armor and armor penetration values. That is not yet the case in Arena Commander, but eventually we should also be able to outfit ships with different types of armor, depending on the situation, in which case the armor penetration of the weapons you use will of course also have an effect. Especially against larger ships, I could imagine that the 60mm cannons will do much better than a 35mm Gatling gun in that case. But for now, this is not my most successful creation. but that is not what I expected it to be anyway. But I hope it shows off some of the things you have to take into account when coming up with a setup for your spacecraft, so let's see if we can make something that works a little bit better. Though keep in mind that I will intentionally avoid weapons that in my opinion perform better than they should, so again this won't be the best setup you can currently get for the ship, but better than the last one would be nice. Now, one of the most obvious problems the last setup had in fighter vs fighter combat was the slow muzzle velocity of the main cannons. Now, I could have just used the smaller 35mm cannons I had on the size 2 mounts on all mounts, but I want to take advantage of the size 3 mounts, and the Mark II Tarantulas are only size 2. So, since I want to stick with the kinetic cannon theme in this video, I decided to replace my large 60mm cannons with 40mm 11 series broadsword cannons. They fire a smaller round than the 60mm Tarantulas, but have a significantly better muzzle velocity and also a better rate of fire, though it is still mediocre at best. Now, since I had a really large difference in the muzzle velocity between the main weapons and the secondaries on the turret last time, I decided to get a weapon that very closely matches the muzzle velocity this time. So I fitted the M4A laser cannons on the turret, as they have an almost identical muzzle velocities to the cannons I have on the wings and under the nose. And yes, those are Star Wars style laser cannons, so they have a muzzle velocity. Deal with it. And speaking of effectiveness versus shields, this is one element of the setup I have not changed on this ship. There are shields available that either increase effectiveness versus missiles but decrease effectiveness versus direct fire, and the other way around, which might be useful, for example, if you have a very agile fighter that is not getting hit that much by cannons but threatened by missiles. But I am going to take a closer look at that in a later video. Now let's take a real quick look how this setup is doing. As you can see, with the muzzle velocity of my guns being much higher, I don't have to lead as much to keep my pipper on the moving target, and the projectiles reach the target quicker, reducing the chance of successful evasive maneuvers by the target. Now, since my two weapon systems, the broadsword cannons and the M4A lasers, have almost the same muzzle velocity, you can hit with both weapon systems at the same time most of the time. As I have mentioned earlier, the cannons can elevate just a little bit, so that the weapons with different muzzle velocities can converge at the same point, as long as the difference in speed is not too big. As you can see here, and as evidenced by often having only one pip instead of two, the cannons are almost always able to do just that, if the relative velocity of the target or range to the target is not too great. If I have to turn too tight though, the pips do separate, as the weapons cannot elevate enough anymore to fire on just one pip. But the space between them is rarely more than the target is long, still giving the opportunity to hit it with all weapon systems, though not exactly at the same spot anymore. Now, the rate of fire of those weapons is still unimpressive, so good aim is required, and I think I can improve on that front with some more training and tweaks to the joystick curve, especially if you match the curve to the ship you're flying. The damage of my weapons is not very high compared to other weapon types of the same size, so I need a good amount of hits to finish an enemy ship off. However, my weapon's power use and heat generation is very low compared to its competition. That is yet another aspect to take into account. My main cannons, since they are ballistic cannons, have pretty much no power requirement and also produce very little heat in comparison to, say, a laser gun. So the gun can basically fire continuously until the ammo is depleted without having to worry about running low on power or overheating. A similar thing is true for my M4A lasers. Now, they are laser cannons, so they need more power and create more heat than my main guns, but with their relatively low rate of fire they can still fire very long till they run out of energy, and that can of course be influenced by a ship's power distribution settings as well. So that's a bit of a trade-off. While the initial DPS of the weapons is lower than that of others, you don't have to worry about them suddenly running low on power or overheating when a fight takes longer than expected. Well, so this is the second setup on the Hornet. Again, not a world beater, but an improvement over the first one, at least in the purely anti-fighter role we currently have in Arena Commander. And this is going to be it for this video. As I've said at the start, I plan on doing more of those videos, eventually showing off all the ships and weapons. Not necessarily to show off the best setups, but more to show off the options that exist and explain how things like weapon mounts work in progress, and what you might want to take into account when creating a setup for a specific task. Well, this is it for this video. As always, I hope this was enjoyable, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.